thanks everybody for joining. My name's Troy Whitaker with ITS Partners, and I have a couple of hats I wear here at ITS, but one of my key roles is to be a subject matter expert for our systems management practice. That's my legacy in the industry and kind of where I've always worked. So that's something that's near and dear to my heart, and as I believe, systems management is the foundation of any IT operation. So I think we have some important things we can discuss today. So let's talk a few things here, right? We're talking about the insights we provided around Windows 10 and why we're still talking about this in the middle of 2017, and the answer is the adoption rate's very slow, right? There's a lot of reasons for that. So today we're going to talk about a few of those challenges, try to give you some ideas to work through that, and then also highlight a few ways you can benefit from this challenge and the disruption in the industry. First though, let's get a little bit of context for what we call the status quo around systems management. So, you know, this era is all about the end user. We call them productive users here at ITS. If you think about the things that people actually use in your business or workplace, it's Office applications, it's your specific line of business apps. It's a number of emerging productivity applications, whether that's Slack or Dropbox or a cloud app or something like that. So there's a number of things that people are going to bring to your business that you don't necessarily have control over, maybe don't even have visibility over. But the news that I want to bring you is that that's not going to stop. It's only going to accelerate, and it's only going to keep increasing across the board. And the reason is these productive users really outpace the current generation of tools. But you really shouldn't be focused on the tools anyways. I really want to talk to you about process. So let me explain what I mean by that. IT right now in our time in the industry is we're caught in a black hole, right? Our end users have extremely high expectations. We're also getting conflicting sometimes direction from our business leaders. You really just can't win right in the status quo. You know, your users are clamoring for new productivity apps all the time, whether that's a new modern device like a Surface. They want to use Slack instead of Link or Skype for business. Office 365 is setting the expectation. You can basically get any line of business or use application whenever you want, wherever you want. And of course, they want it to all work on mobile. At the same time, businesses are watching expenses more closely than ever, right? They're trying to get control of shadow IT. They're trying to limit solution sprawl. Many clients that I speak with talk about how they're consolidating to either single sourcing or single vendors. This is not a unique trend by any means. It's something that's happening across all industries. So with all of that, your boss still asks you, why aren't we doing better? Why can't we deliver this? Why is this person complaining, right? We still get these challenges in spite of the high tax that we have to deliver some systems management workloads. So you can't make all these people happy all the time. You've probably heard that at some point in your life, but you can get close. One, you have to modernize, and then you have to solve a few key challenges, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So I want to introduce something called the productivity paradox, and the resistance to that fourth era that I talked about is what's putting us in this paradox. The current challenges are not fully solvable by any one tool from any one vendor. If you think about that, it's really hard to go buy something that will competently manage your Windows 10 devices, manage your Macs in a first-class way, will also manage your mobile devices, both iOS and Android, with the same level of service. What if you've got Samsung Knox extensions, or you have some other kind of regulatory compliance you have to meet? If you start talking about patching and all of the layers that come in on top of that, whether that's vulnerability data, handling incidents, it's really hard to buy a thing from a company to do all of that. And that's the paradox, right? We've gone from our legacy on-premise systems management tools, which are still very mature, but they're not evolving to meet today's use cases. And the new tools that are cloud-born really don't replicate that functionality. They can't fulfill the mission of the legacy tool yet. And so therefore, we're kind of caught in this time warp period where we really can't solve it. And so we need some help, and we need some new ideas to do that. Yeah, I think you can solve some of these issues through integration and modernization of the tools, but we really need to ask ourselves the right questions and take a look at some processes first. So I know this is a very dense visual. We'll come back to that, so hang with me while we explore some of these questions. So the things I want to talk to you about today are, well, really, where should you be prioritizing Windows 10, right? We all have competing priorities in our IT organization and a lot to solve. Where does it fit in? Do you need a new tool? Or should we look at some processes, right? Do we need to change the way the business operates? Do you have the right people in the right seats to work on this and be successful? Are you collaborating and communicating across different teams, whether that's IT ops or DevOps or IT sec, potentially other departments outside of that, right, where you have significant stakeholders? Are you really realizing the full value of the tools that you have now? That can often be an impediment to further investment, right? If I'm an IT director or CIO and I look at a suite of tools that I bought and somebody comes back to me and says, well, we need to buy this to do this now. We need to buy this to do this other thing. Decision makers look at that and they go, well, why am I not getting more value of what I've already paid for, right? Do I even know what it can do? Those are questions we want to answer. And then finally, are we automating everything that we can, and how are we going to keep that going over the long term, right? I have an opinion on this, and I think to solve this paradox, you really got to do a couple of things first. You got to raise the importance and the visibility of Windows 10 within your organization, and then you've got to start from a clean CMDB. If you don't have an asset program, it really doesn't matter what you're going to do around risk management or systems management or service management. If you're not starting from a clean CMDB with a strong asset program, you're starting at a disadvantage. So let's dig in and talk a little bit more about this. And I'm going to try to give you some hallmark indicators of organizations that are being successful. So this data is being abstracted from work that we're doing with other clients and areas that we've seen be successful. So I'll try to pepper in some relevance here and there and let you know what industry we're talking about or any particular attributes of those organizations. So the first thing we want to do is we want to prioritize the most important outcomes, right? You don't have to do everything to best practice right off the bat. I often put this in terms of what good is best practice if it's on an island that you can't reach, right? You've got to take some foundational steps and build yourself a path to get there. I think it's better to get a sustainable program in place and then iterate that more, with more agility over time. There's so much innovation disruption in our industry. It really doesn't pay to build the perfect solution over a long period of time. You're much better off working in an agile manner where you put key pieces in place and you build on those and you adjust along the way. And the bottom line for me is you really need to be on a monthly or 30-day cadence or sprint anyways. So keep that in mind as we talk about this stuff. So what are the key things you need to do in order to prioritize appropriately? Well, one, you got to keep system deployments going, right? We're all having trouble getting the hardware we need to run Windows 7. We've got new hardware showing up that requires Windows 10 and maybe our organization isn't ready to support it. We don't know how to get the right drivers, a number of problems that come there, but you got to keep that going. So above all else, as you make changes and as you iterate, don't disrupt system deployments because that's the number one thing that's going to get escalated to an executive level. I've even heard this termed as we have people walking around without computers because we can't deploy them. That's a bad day for IT. You want to provide a low friction onboarding. Think about this, a new employee, maybe a Gen Z or a millennial that comes into your organization, they're going to have a mobile phone that they want to work on. They expect a cloud experience. Any friction in that process is going to be starting behind the curve with your next generation of employees. So this is things like having single sign-on for applications, shiny modern devices that look cool, the ability to do their work on a number of devices or what they call the screen of the moment, right? Whether they're laying on the couch with an iPad or on the train or in a Starbucks with their iPhone. Don't expect people to be accustomed to sitting in a cube at an office building and accepting the status quo because they won't. You won't attract and retain the best talent unless you provide a low friction onboarding and a great initial experience. You want to keep increasing your patch compliance. This is critical. Now, I ran a poll at the beginning of this webinar, and the reason I did that is I hear every possible answer you could imagine. I visit about 200 customers a year across the country and the world, and I hear numbers all over the place. This is a real problem in our industry, and it doesn't mean we're doing anything wrong. It just means that we're caught in this paradox. We can't fully solve it, right? You might have a great systems management tool that does a good job of pushing out patches, but it probably doesn't have a very good intelligence engine that truly shows you a picture of your vulnerability. You got to buy another tool for that, and then you got to integrate that tool. You probably don't have a tool that does those things and then gives you a great analytics dashboard where you can feed telemetry to people. So there's a number of challenges to this, and it has a lot to do with the speed at which we can move, the number of evolving threats and how that keeps changing. And if anything, your malware authors and your virus writers are moving at the same speed as our software vendors, so we're all going to have to get on the bullet train with them. But you got to keep moving that number up, and really one of the things that you can do is set a number, make sure that your systems management platform is configured to achieve a high degree of patch compliance, and then socialize those numbers, right? As you have success and you're able to make incremental improvements, that's one of the best ways to secure your spot in an IT organization is show growth from, let's say, 40% patch compliance to 90% patch compliance over a 6-month period. That is possible. We do it all the time. Finally, keeping productivity tools up to date is another critical piece of having happy, productive end users. Nobody wants to hear that they can't have the coolest new thing for Outlook, or they don't have this new feature for OneDrive, or they can't use Slack, or they can't use some other cool app that I don't even know about. If IT policy is getting in the way of the latest and greatest productivity tools, you're going to be at a disadvantage, especially with your newest generation of employees. So let's talk a little bit more about process. That really needs to come before the tools. Now, I know that that's a little bit of a catch-22. Maybe you already have tools in place, or you're considering making a tool switch for some other reason, whether that's budgetary or vendor alignment, merger and acquisition in your company, something like that. But one of the things that you can do to position yourself better is define your device procurement strategy. Now, a lot of people were caught by surprise when it turned out that Skylake-based devices stopped shipping, and now we have to deploy Kaby Lake, and guess what? Kaby Lake only supports Windows 10. Some of my customers got letters guaranteeing them certain quantities. Some of my customers pre-ordered a large quantity of devices to try and last through the year. Some people did little to nothing. We have customers right now that order one piece of hardware, and the OEM ships a different piece of hardware with a different chipset. Turns out that they've run out of hardware at this point, and so if you got a letter guaranteeing you stock through September, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but they're not going to have that hardware for you. So we need to move quickly to have readiness to support Windows 10, and that starts with having a device procurement strategy where you're engaging your procurement officers, you're engaging your service desk, you're engaging the people who buy devices, and you're socializing what you're doing so that they understand IT's position and capabilities around Windows 10. You need to know that patch compliance threshold. It's one of the most important numbers that you can report up. It's one of the best pieces of data you have to do PR work within IT, and it shows your value, right? You don't want to say it's pretty good or we don't know. You want to say we achieved 98.6% compliance within 30 days of release by the vendor. That's the kind of language that will get noticed at the executive level. You also want to align your deployments and your workloads to your end user habits, right? So that might mean not deploying an Office update between 9 and 5 p.m. when your salespeople are likely to be giving a presentation, right? You need to tune and optimize your systems management tool to do that at nighttime when they're likely not to be in a boardroom, or make sure we account for changes in time zones, right? If you have engineers traveling to Asia Pacific, while you think 9 p.m. Eastern might be a great time to do an endpoint scan, it's probably not a great time for them over there. So again, focusing on end user happiness and productivity will help change the conversation around IT, not as a cost center, but as a value provider. And then finally, informing your leaders' expectations through providing analytics and great telemetry is another huge win. I like to leverage Power BI. There's a number of other tools there, but anywhere that you can put together data from disparate sources and present a single dashboard that shows your state of IT and your operational tempo is a great way to get noticed in your organization and show a lot of value for your role and your team. Speaking of teams, you got to have the right people. Now let me talk about Windows 10 here for a second. This has to start with your CIO. And guess what? Almost nobody's getting sponsorship at the CIO level for Windows 10. But this is a foundational shift in our endpoint or systems management strategy. You are deploying the last version of Windows you will deploy. That's why we call it current branch. and you're going to be taking care of it over a long period of time with a much quicker cadence and a lot less room for error. So you need sponsorship at that high level. I think I talked on our last webinar about, if you don't have CIO or CSO sponsorship, you're in trouble, and that's true, because the organizations that we see struggling to get Windows 10 adoption in place in order to meet all these other external pressures and challenges, it's because they don't have the sponsorship within their organization, and we really need that, and I think everybody knows that now. You got to take care of your sysadmins, right? Make sure they understand the impact of changes to the infrastructure. If you're doing more things with Windows 10, that's probably going to have some impact on network utilization or utilization of a hypervisor that might be hosting your systems management tool. So you want to make sure that you take care of those folks and let them know what changes to expect, how we're expecting impact to roll out over time. That may have to do with a migration to a tool set or something like that. And also site migrations as you roll out either new tools or Windows 10 to devices that are distributed in your infrastructure. You really want to get that buy-in early. And speaking of buy-in, I would highly recommend you socialize decisions you're making around Windows 10 with your security folks. There are a number of advantages that you can point to help get their sponsorship and get on board with projects. It's also good to socialize these decisions earlier so that implementation is not flanked later. And it's a way for us to collaborate and make sure that we connect those people together, make sure that we're working together towards the same goal, which is to move to Windows 10 as quickly as possible because we have to. Another area that we like to talk about is integrating the service desk earlier. I used to run a help desk, and I'll tell you what, that's one group of people who don't like to be surprised by change in the IT operating environment because they're often the folks that take the calls at the first level. So make sure that you're socializing changes and decisions and cascading communication to inform them so that they can inform your end users and keep that customer NPS score up there. And then finally, this is an area that a lot of people don't think about, but you've probably got some scripters or IT ninjas in your organization. They're probably going to be on the younger side, either entry-level engineers or interns. They may have key skills around PowerShell, JavaScript, Ruby, whatever it is. Automation platforms are the skills that we see graduates coming out of school with, or people just entering the industry, and they can very quickly help you leapfrog challenges by automating solutions around them. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but go look for those people and look near the bottom of your organization or entry level, because that's where you'll most often find them. So speaking of connecting, we got to connect the silos in our IT organizations. Embracing cross-team collaboration is key to making Windows 10 work in your organization. You don't want to introduce a new platform that breaks a key line of business application and have that application owner come after you. You don't want to just randomly turn on Windows Defender and have that break an endpoint security tool and have the security team come after you. So you want to embrace that as a strategy, and then you want to document that. That's to get buy-in and clarity of communication across these teams on how these devices are going to be configured, how they're going to live in the environment, and what we should expect from them. Those are all things that maybe don't touch the end user experience, but they're critical to making sure that we have stability over time and we're able to deliver a great productivity experience. One thing that I think is important to do is you want to link these projects that share a release cadence. So for example, Microsoft has aligned releases for Office 365, Windows 10, and System Center. That means that twice a year in March and October, they're getting a significant release of those platforms. So you want to know that, and you want to plan for that in your strategic IT plan, so that as you're looking at how you're going to keep up to date with the latest productivity application, there are probably dependencies for the underlying tools and platforms, and you want to be able to document that plan, communicate that plan, and then execute on that plan. And then last thing here, you can win with analytics, not reporting. And the difference is reporting just tells you what happened. It's not actionable. Analytics tells you what's going on right now in your environment, right? Are you seeing a spike in infections in a certain site? Are you seeing a spike in bandwidth utilization, right? Those are all kind of indicators that you can use to go proactively look for issues. And to me, that's the difference between reporting and analytics. So let's make sure that we don't fail by having tool letdown, right? So that's basic stuff, but it's worth reviewing. You want to follow your vendor specifications, right? If they say 8 cores per box for this, don't shortchange it and go to 6. Most of the vendors do QA, so they know why they're recommending that. Leverage the field expertise. That doesn't mean just going to partners or consultants like me, but getting into communities and meeting, whether that's advocates for the vendor or peers from companies in your geographic area. A lot of folks come from different areas. They bounce between partner communities and customer communities, and there's a lot of insight that you can gather by getting involved in those. So whether that's on something like Meetup or user groups or going to vendor events, there's a lot of people that you can meet that can help you, gain some insight and make the right decision the first time. Fully document your configurations. That's so important, right? Even down to the individual settings levels. We see people stumble with this all the time. Especially if you're buying consulting from somebody. If they're not providing you well-polished artifacts with a complete configuration, then that's something you need to look at. Sort of in that same vein, we want to compare and contrast anything we're doing against the larger IT strategy. As I hinted, that goes back to getting CIO level sponsorship for your Windows 10 project. Because that way your implementation is not going to be flanked when you are a contradiction to some other higher level strategy, right? And really important here, identify risks early on and get cross-functional teams engaged to solve them. So for example, if you're rolling out Windows 10 and you're not sure how you should configure direct access, well, that's a very simple conversation, right? Bring in your network administrator, bring in somebody from security, bring in somebody from the service desk. Ask them what the end user expectations are for remote access. Ask your security folks what they're willing to accept for port and protocol through the firewall. Ask your network administrator what he's willing to enable in configuration and bandwidth consumption, right? Number of examples here, but what's really important to take away from this is Windows 10 is a platform that your productive user is going to ride on top of. And it's very important that we give them a good foundation to be productive on. And that is going to require a lot of conversations with a lot of teams over a long period of time to make sure we get this right. So I talked a little bit about automating things, and look, you got to PowerShell all the things. It's the most critical skill that I see in my industry. It's the most critical skill I see in most of my customer shops. When I see a very successful customer who is ahead of the curve, it's because they're investing in PowerShell capability and knowledge at many levels through their organization. Whether it's just doing the month of lunches book, going to a PowerShell user group, there are things you need to get involved in. And if you're a hiring manager in IT, I'm telling you right now, this is a critical skill that you want to be looking for on the resume when it comes to enterprise management. Let's also look at bandwidth management capabilities very carefully. Tools have a big impact on this. Usually somebody's pulling their hair out because we're doing something like deploying an Office 365 update that's 1.5 gigs to every device in the infrastructure. So we want to make sure that we're looking at optimization there, whether that's managing at point to point, throttling at the endpoint itself, or doing a combination of things, and maybe even leveraging branch cache, right? Eliminate steps and choices to increase consistency. So this could be everything from an operating system deployment script that doesn't allow you to input any values. Maybe you can only choose known good data from a dropdown. It might be wizard-driven installation. It could be a number of things around managed software delivery, which kind of brings me to the question, if you're still pushing out software packages manually, we need to talk. Nobody's doing that anymore. That's some valuable but mundane work that you don't need to be spending your time on. You need to be spending your time on a great analytics dashboard for your executive leadership, not making sure you get the Adobe Acrobat update out. That can be fully automated these days, and that's what it should be. You need to be working on more valuable pursuits for your organization. So finally here, as we talk about how to be successful going forward, first piece of advice is engage with an expert in a larger sample size than just your environment. We need to grow the DNA sample here. I often see people fall into the trap of thinking everything's fine because nobody's complaining, or it's the way we've always done it and it seems to be successful. Our industry is very dynamic. You want to be involved in communities where you're hearing about things happening, you understand what's going on. If you're plugged in, you might know that right now there's an infection of ransomware growing across Europe and the US. It's based on a different payload than WannaCry. I think it's called PeterWap or something like that. It's still based on the same Eternal Blue exploit that was released by the shadow brokers a couple of months ago. It still only really infects devices that have SMB-v1 enabled, and it still really targets devices that are not running Windows 10. So, you know, being able to keep up with news like that and understand what's happening in our industry in real time means you can't be spending time pushing buttons to send software somewhere. You got to be plugged in and consuming data on a daily basis so that we can operate in speed and at the same tempo with our adversaries or our partners, right? I've talked a lot about getting involved in communities. I can't recommend that enough, especially PowerShell user groups. Just go search for them. You want to validate the work of all contributors, both internal and external. That means having maybe one partner do the work and another partner validate it. It means maybe doing some work internally, but having an external auditor validate that. You want to make sure you have a good asset program in place. You have a clean CMDB. You have good tools on top of that, and you're tying it all together with great process that you're always iterating on a monthly basis, not yearly, not quarterly, certainly not every 10 years. We don't have time for that anymore. And finally, make sure you're setting a strategic plan for IT. You're scheduling upgrades up front. You're scheduling and aligning what you're doing with tools to what you want to do from a strategic perspective, so you didn't get caught up in firefightitis, right? We all know what that feels like. You're trying to get something done that you think is going to move the organization ahead, and you got to spend half of your Monday trying to figure out why a patch didn't deploy, right? And it's probably because a task server somewhere failed. We got to get out of that mode of firefighting in order to drive real change. So wrapping up here, folks, what can you do? Well, I hinted a little bit at the productivity paradox. That's something I would certainly love to talk you through. One of my architects can talk you through it. There's some thought leadership here that we'll link you to that you can consume. But what I'd like you to do after listening to this, and as you put it in your subconscious, think about how you're going to solve the productivity paradox over the next 2 to 3 years. There is no tool that's going to solve these challenges for you. It's going to be a combination of tools with great process and some external input into your organization where you're getting the benefit of others' field experience. When you think about how you get things done, great news, I have a solution for you. If you'd like a one-time transfer of best practices, we can do that through our advisory services arm. If you're ready to subscribe to best practices and some outcomes, we can do that for you through our managed services operation. With that, I want to thank you for your time today. We'll follow up on Q&A, provide some source URLs, and get some insights to your inbox. And we'll see you again in a few weeks to talk about what you can do around Windows 10, security operations, and vulnerability management. Thanks for your time.